Okay, this text is one of the most famous texts, not only by Walter Benjamin, but in general in the public. It's the most read and reprinted in the last decades. Than any, it has been read and reprinted more than any other philosophical text in the last decades. Yet it's a quite difficult text, like Benjamin uses to be. And it's also, I must give you some material history of the of the text, because what we have written is one of the 4 versions that exists of it. There are at least 4 manuscripts, more or less complete, but Benjamin kept working on it until his death. The texts we have are all around 1935 and 1936. It was believed that the version that was found in Horkheimer's legacy was of 1939, but it appears not to be true. I will not be boring about this, but it is important to remember that like most Walter Benjamin's text, this one is a work in progress. It's fragmentary with many additions. The last important note about it is something Benjamin wrote on the label of a mineral water bottle, and it, because he was still thinking over what's aura, and this fragment says aura is let me retrieve, is the human ability to return the gaze to something or someone. And I'd like to start from this, because even if it's not even an addition, not even a last addition to this text, it's very important, I think, because it connects the idea of aura with the sacred, but also with human beings and their mutual creation. That is something we at Museum of Care a lot about. The cult aspect of art, the one that is lost in reproduction, is about making a fetish of this returning the gaze. It is making an hypostasis, putting this gaze in an other world, in a separated world, in everything that is sacred, following Marcel Mauss and David, is about hierarchy and being separated. And this is the cult value of art that is lost in reproduction. And this relationship between cult, art as cult, as an ethereal beauty, as something separated and sacred, this opposition between these and the photography and the mechanical reproduction that makes the artist, the work of art, an object between amongst other objects, and an object like all other ones, is a key feature of this text. What is lost in reproduction is the authority, the authenticity, the dream, the myth of authenticity of that is peculiar to the original work of art, that cannot be displaced, that cannot be reproduced, because manual reproduction is a fake. The mechanical reproduction is not a fake, is declared as a reproduction, and this produces a disenchantment of it and makes it, as I said before, an object amongst objects, and by being mechanical, it shows the fact that this is an artifact. When reading this text, I had an objection, because actually our idea of art is we use this word art that was not used by Greeks or Latins, because Vasari made a wonderful operation of marketing about Michelangelo and Raffaello. He wrote about them as artists, but at the Michelangelo and Raffaello times, an artist was simply an artisan. It was very common person. It was not an artist as we think of it now. Nevertheless, the cult part of the nature of a work of art was even stronger at their times, and is in a very opposite way stronger in our times. Benjamin opposes the fascist way to react to the mechanical reproduction of art, of mechanical reproduction of life, with the political or revolutionary one. The opposition is in the fact that fascism perpetuates property, is aimed to perpetuate property, and in order to do so, it reintroduces artificially a myth of authenticity. Whereas ancient statues were gods, it makes of movie stars idols artificially. It reproduces through the commercial separation of the work of art from life, a separation that is not anymore of the form of art. And this takes me to what Nika and David wrote about Venice Biennale and the artificial creation of separated world of art and of artists through the commerce, through the selling of art. And I would love Nika to say something about it. One last point about cinema and the mechanics. What the difference between nature and movie is that the naturality of it is the consequence of work, while in theater the spectator watches the actor directly. The image that we see on the screens is mediated by the camera and by montage. And the difference is that the intervention of artificiality of human work is apparent, and this makes the movie so natural. The naturality, the appearance of authenticity of the movie is the product, is an artificial product. And this makes the difference between, says Benjamin, the magician and the surgeon, and the difference between a painter and a movie maker is the same as between a painter, a magician, and a surgeon. In that the magician pretends to act naturally, with with a separation between he and the patient, that is with a pretension of authenticity, of immediateness, that is the contrary of the movie and of the surgeon, where the artificial, the human intervention is clear, and for this reason there is no pretension of natural, of authenticity. And this claim for authenticity is that is the feature of cult, of art, the ancient way, is exactly what fascism tries to bring back in art and in movies. The political assumption of the reproduction of art is to recognize that everything in human relationships is artificial, is the make of humans. The movies are clearly the make of humans, are not magic, are not authentic, are not immediate. The movie with its camera, with the mediation of mechanics makes it clear that this thing, that our world is an artificial world, is something we make. And as David said, we can as well make differently. So that's all.
Yeah, thank you very much, Simona. Cool. So I just want to quickly say about artists versus proletariat. That was in our essay that Simona mentioned, called Another Art World or Art Communism. So it's an essay about art communism and prolet cult that was set up in Soviet Union, the early Soviet Union. So it just said that the figures of artists and proletariat, the concept of artists and proletariat was born in the same time historically, and it's a kind of alter figures. So we know everything about artists who is producing some kind of magic objects, but we don't know anything, or we don't want to know anything about proletariat, who is always anonymous, but actually these guys produce everything we actually use, cups and so on. Yeah, and our essay is very much in line with what Benjamin is saying here, and I hope we can discuss it now. So I just want to repeat the first sentence that Simona said about aura, according to the Benjamin, is an ability to return the gaze. And I really want some people to comment on that, and I will start with John Phillips, who we talk about what is aura in the times of Benjamin. Maybe I will give her to John now. John, you unmute yourself.
Thanks, Nika. I didn't know you were going to ask that, so I don't have any notes prepared. So I'm going to just shoot from the hip. I confess that I have many problems with Benjamin's essay, but I think that one should place in context the kind of information and analysis that would have surrounded him at the time. Simona mentioned Vasari and Lives of the Artists. Vasari talks about painters. He only mentions one artist who was a printmaker, who was Raimondi. And he only mentions him because Raimondi was Raphael's printmaker. One of the strange things about print, about this essay, and why it's in the print world been kind of fetishized to a large degree, is that not a lot was written about print. I would argue that print transformed European intellectual life, and previously it had transformed Chinese and Eastern intellectual life. But actually, nobody actually reproduced a printing press until 100 years after printing had come into Europe. And nobody wrote about the process of print until something like 250 years after printing had actually impacted enormously. So it's a technology which is almost invisible to the people who are engaged in it. And at the time that Benjamin was writing, actually all art historians had completely overlooked print as anything that was of any importance. If you go to kind of Gombrich's kind of famous sort of story of art, he has a very few lines on print and more or less says it's unimportant. People don't really start writing about print sort of critically until long after Benjamin writes this essay. So Marshall McLuhan actually begins to write about print and Gutenberg and the impact of that media in the 60s. But McLuhan isn't a historian, and McLuhan sort of dives into a subject and throws up a whole number of ideas, but kind of he doesn't assemble them. And it's only later that another writer called Elizabeth Eisenstein tries to put together a history of print and its impact, which actually is kind of much fuller than Benjamin would have been familiar with. My first problem with him is that he slides various forms of printing into each other as if they're a historical linear of progression. So he talks about woodblock, etching, and then lithography. And he attributes to lithography that lithography kind of brings print to the masses and to the world. And this actually just isn't true. It's just not factually the case. Without being kind of too obsessive about it, what happens to print and it becoming a mass media is the steam press, which in the early 19th century radically increases the rate at which images can be reproduced. And simultaneously, or almost simultaneously, the use of acid to break down the fibers of wood that enable wood to be used as a paper source. So the non-kind of mechanization or industrialization of the press and the limited amount of paper were the things that held print back in a mass market. But it didn't hold print back in terms of it being an art object. And many artists actually utilize print almost as they would have used painting. So for makers, the idea that the art is an object which is kind of beyond redemption just isn't true. You know, Lucian Freud puts his feet through paintings. Makers completely transform paintings all the time in the process of making them. They have no aura. They have, you know, we make things and we manipulate them. It's only when paintings or objects go out to an audience that maybe a different kind of gaze is applied to them. So I do have a number of problems with Benjamin historically. I think he's inaccurate, but he didn't have sufficient analysis around him to actually kind of view things differently. He then takes photography as if photography is a extension of the other forms of printing and the most modern, the most up-to-date, and the one that actually produces things, you know, more strongly. I think he's very accurate in his understanding of photography. And that comes down when, I think it's apposite when he talks about the painter as magician, and the cinematographer as the surgeon. And I think at that point, he's profoundly misunderstanding what photography does. Photography reflects light upon a surface. It doesn't analyze that surface. You have to really manipulate the surface and the lighting or the post-production in order to bring certain ideas to it, particularly medical or scientific ideas. And different kind of version of the magician and the surgeon is to be found in Leonardo da Vinci's drawings. And what Leonardo does is complete transformation of visual making is he realizes that you can smudge things or you can make things really very clear. So the smile of the Mona Lisa is an enigmatic smile that comes initially from underdrawing of using chalk to smudge the kind of definition of its subject. Paint can smudge and can kind of, you know, make some things slightly ambiguous. But what Leonardo also did was to make drawings that were of the anatomy of the human body. He entered the body conceptually in order to be able to draw the elements that he thought about. So he shows the human body in ways that no photograph could, because he's using a pen to define edges and to postulate the way in which the body operates as a machine. You get that tradition of analytical drawing going right the way through into the 20th century. So if you went to study anatomy, you wouldn't be shown photographs, you'd be shown drawings. And, you know, if you were studying botany, botanical illustration utilizes the principles of Leonardo's analytical drawing, because photography can't do that sort of definition, or it's much weaker at that kind of definition. So I think Benjamin, unfortunately, misunderstands the history of reproduction, and he misunderstands the photograph as an analytical tool. Maybe I should leave it there. I do have some questions about the aura, because the aura, I think, was a term that was commonly used in the sort of 20s and 30s amongst theosophy and theosophists. And I think he borrows the term aura from theosophy. And it's interesting that such a materialist thinker uses a term that's been used in a sort of a very spiritualist way, and it's still baffling Marxists today. I'm going to leave it at that, because I think I've probably thrown many spanners into the proverbial works.
Yeah, thank you, John. Yeah, that was cool. So bad study of Walter Benjamin, so unreliable source of information about everything. But I will, yeah, so for me, you still, yeah, I probably, of course, agree with you about history of printing, because you're the best person, maybe in English speaking world, to talk about that. But it's, for me, it didn't change my understanding of necessity to make art political instead of make art artistic. And in this case, this text is fundamental for me. But I maybe would ask Simon to talk about photography, if it's possible, if anyone else want to join. Simon? Oh, okay.
Oh, Christian asked for the floor.
Yeah, but I like Simon, you don't want to we go by
I just want to answer John, but later.
No, Simona, I want to ask Simon, not Simona.
Oh, okay, sorry. I don't know if I agree with John. It was very interesting being that tour, but we gave up drawing objects in the museum from material analysis as soon as photography was able to come in and do that job. And we are talking about proletarian images, but as far as the analysis of objects in the museum, and I've researched closely on the work that's been done at the V&A around the Raphael cartoons. Photography has been used since 1864 right up until the present as a means of material analysis, a very effective one. So I kind of think I understand that kind of what's missing, you're saying, but for me, there are things missing in this text, but it's not to do, I think it falls over itself in some ways around this sense of the model copy, this kind of, that it is a reflection of nature, or it's a, you know, it's a mirror of nature. And that's something that I would really question. But I do think that there is, in the photographic and in cinema, there's a fundamental shift that happens in how we perceive, how the world is perceived. I don't think we can necessarily make a kind of a kind of a trajectory through printing to the photograph. You can if you stay with the notion of mechanical reproduction, but I think that's in many ways what the photograph actually is kind of telling it's doing, but in fact it might be doing something else, and it might be actually doing something that's actually going back to that sense in the text of kind of the ritualizing of and the undermining of that kind of individual hand of the artist, I guess, in quite a a very interesting way for me. I'm sorry, I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, thank you. So, Christian?
Yeah, hi. I kind of disagree with some of the things that were said before. And if I use strange words, please don't be too much confused, because I read the text in the German original, so I'm translating in my head on the go, basically. And because I think what's really important if you analyze this text is you have the first thing you have to see, this is a massively political text. And if you look at the beginning and the end, I mean, he starts with Marx and he ends with communism. That's very clearly situates him in what he's trying to do. And I think he has an intention here. I mean, he also states this in the opening, where he basically says, look, we have to get away from traditional ways of framing art and instead try to find a frame that is usable in a way that is not well, corruptible by fascism, because he sees the problems with fascism very clearly, I think. And also, I think another thing that's really important, and please, everybody, don't get me wrong, because I think this is a kind of intellectually minded crowd here. But I think about among intellectually minded people, you know, a taste in art, you know, is and a certain way of looking at art beyond what masses would consider art is, well, popular snobbery, you know, so let's not be snobbish here. And I think also in this text, it's not about historical accuracy. It's about the moment Benjamin was in when he wrote the text. And, you know, it's more about the things he saw leading up. It's more about the point he's trying to make than what came before. And also, I think he was kind of aware he's like in a moment of change. I think he references this in the text as well. It's about the ongoing development of media and its relationship to the world. And what he also very clearly states is like, look, for example, does film constitute art? And there was a debate, or is photography art? And he says, this is not the question whether this is art. The question is, how does the conception of the term art change because of these new forms? And also, I think it's about mass culture, which was new. I mean, when we had art before, it was like not something that was you could consume in the way it is possible now. And like the forms in which politically mass culture expressed itself at the time was fascism and communism. And I think what's really important, and if you go back to the idea of fascism, which is very clearly what drove him to write this text, in my opinion, is that fascism was trying to aestheticize politics in order to preserve property, basically. And the final sentence in the essay is also, communism's answer for this is the politicization of art. And what I also like, when you go back to my thing about snobbery, it's about art does not have to be aesthetically pleasing. And in the development, when you come from cult and ritual to the artwork, there was a form of aestheticizing that happened, because the original cult object didn't have to be pretty, because most people never ever get to saw it anyways. It was about what happened in the head. And for the ritual, the aestheticism isn't really important. And the problem was more like, as the rituals, the magical rituals became devoid of sense, you know, of an interior life, the aestheticization, the aesthetic aspects, they took over. And then it kind of turned from religion to contemplation, which, you know, what people with certain form of education would probably think of art is for. And that can give the individual quite a lot. But at the time Benjamin was writing, you know, which was after the bourgeoisie had taken over from the royals and it was all heading towards fascism, this kind of contemplation had degenerated. This is something he also quite clearly states in the text. And I'm nearly done, by the way. The reaction here came from the dataists. or Dadaist, I'm not sure how you pronounce that in English, when they said, look, this contemplation is bullshit. You know, let's see what's really going on. And they showed contemplation was empty. And this is where film then came in. And they did away with contemplation, because it wasn't about, you know, consciously kind of approaching the work of art, is because it's too fast, you know, you can't stop it. It's just going on and on and on. And your way of engaging with that is by not engaging with it. It's you're distracted. But this is the challenge of mass culture. This is what film was answering. Film was giving you a way of dealing with mass culture, because there's too much, and you did by accustomizing you to too much, basically. And you didn't learn it consciously. You were just getting hit over the head long enough, you know, to get used to it, basically. And in the end, I think what Benjamin thought film could do, not necessarily under circumstances of capitalist production, but by being revolutionary and pointing this out and getting the masses engaged. I think that was the point, you know. At the point he wrote this essay, and maybe he would have changed it later, I don't know.
Thank you. Yeah, Simona?
Oh, just a short note about, well, first of all, thank you, Christian. It was illuminating. And I just wanted to note about print that Rabelais and Cervantes would not have been possible without printing as a mass thing. They were sold in markets, in leaflets for the populace. It was not a snobbish thing. And it was not just a bourgeois thing. It was really the reproduction of literature. But that was all I had to say.
Yeah, interesting. We just talked with Chris an hour ago about almost exactly the same. He was showing me his new book in production about history of information, and it was a big part about print and McLuhan also, and so on. Maybe you want to say something, Chris?
Yeah, no, well, I don't know what, yeah, I've made this book. It's sort of like a history of all of communication, from language to, you know, writing, print, media, the internet. But yeah, one thing I was kind of thinking, you know, like, before mechanical reproduction, you know, artists were mass communication. I mean, it was, the painters were how to communicate to the masses, and it's what, you know, the church and everyone used to communicate, you know, widely. And as soon as sort of print and mechanical, you know, reproduction came along, in some ways, sort of painters were a little bit kind of redundant, but yet there's a sort of, they were the cultural elite, and there was a lot of, you know, intellectual elite that sort of just got, you know, what do we do now these days? And in some ways it's kind of similar a little bit to, you know, before religion was science, you know, that it was where everyone looked to get the answers, all of the history and creation and whatever. And as soon as sort of, you know, science comes out, religion takes on this cultic kind of aura. Do you know what I mean? So it's kind of similar in a way. It's been sidelined by the mass communication, and it's you know, then but you've got a whole industry of cultural elites sort of, well, what do we do? We you know, we're no longer needed, and sort of the object of art is more, I don't know, yeah. So It was just linking back. I mean, it's a thread that I'm sort of talking about a little bit in my book, but yeah, I don't know how much really related to Benjamin it is really.
Yeah, so
Done.
that, thank you. Yeah, well, this text, it's very difficult for me was to read this text as well, because I'm reading in English. English is not my first language, and it's a translation from German. So I'm just like was guessing what did he mean. But overall, the most important part for me in this text is a kind of confirmation what I was always think, that in order to actually to make a progressive art, we have to kill the notion of artist as a magician. That's period. So either everybody artist, or there is no art, or it's like really sick society. And that's kind of unsettling, maybe a thought for somebody, but I think it's beautiful, and I think it's a very radical text at the end of the day. But a lot of things here is not understandable for me. So, for example, I would like to ask somebody who can clarify the relationship between Dadaism and what Walter Benjamin mean by this paragraph of Dadaism. If somebody can help. We have only 6 minutes left, but maybe I will be selfish in using my privileged role of organizer, ask exactly this question, and then maybe somebody else has some other questions.
I think, John.
I think it's difficult because there are 3 Dadas. There's a Dada in Zurich, there's a Dada in Berlin, and there's a Dada in New York, and they're very, very different. Zurich is kind of an anarchist kind of cabaret that's throwing up all sorts of ideas, but is not directly political. Berlin Dada is directly political and engaged politically. New York Dada is actually kind of playing the bourgeoisie for kind of all it's got and playing games. They're very, very different things. So I think it's hard to talk about one Dadaism. And I think that it's much more complex, as I think is the text that kind of Benjamin, or the background to the text that Benjamin is, the events that Benjamin is dealing with. I think we need to pull out a lot of the strands in order to understand them better, because I think he synthesizes things too neatly in order to achieve a political kind of aim within his text.
If I may, I think what Dadaists tried to do was to disenchant art. They, Benjamin says, what they intended and achieved was a relentless destruction of the aura of their creations, which they branded as reproductions with the very means of production. It was about removing the ritual, the sacred, the hierarchical side from the work of art. It was about putting the work of art in human reality as an object amongst objects. And this, says Benjamin, is very more effectively done by cameras and by photography and movies.
Yeah, also provoking the audience and making them include them almost forcefully in kind of dragging them into the art production process by making the audience angry. Can you also answer, Simona, what do you mean? What does it mean exactly, aura as an ability to return the gaze?
It was just a note, one of the last notes retrieved from Benjamin's, what Benjamin left. I don't know what he meant by this, but there is a it to me it relates to something he says in this text about the fact that paysage, nature, the aura of natural things is in their separation, in their the fact that you cannot attain them, whilst the aura in works of art is in their unicity. And it reminds me of something Rilke said about the beauty as something you cannot possess, you cannot, that provokes in you a nostalgia because you cannot attain it. But in all of this, the human gaze is the relationship, is the fact that we are mutual creations, is the fact that we, by looking at each other, we imagine each other and we create each other. It's an act to returning the gaze is an act of recognition, is the and the presence of a person is in the fact that this person reacts to you, looks back to you, and this is its authenticity. It is the authenticity of the person. Its aura is in the relationship with you, and the note that Brecht made about this note is also quite interesting, because he points out, I hope I can find it, the expectation that we are looking at will, that what we are looking at will return to us. The gaze generates the aura. Benjamin discovered this by analyzing cinema. Everything is mystical in this attitude, that is contrary to mysticism. This is one of the moments where Benjamin uses theological concepts to reverse them, but they still are theological concepts. I'm afraid I made it even less clear than it was.
No, you was, if I understand correctly, you were saying that aura basically should belong to people. So aura is coming from person to person as a mutual creation of relationship. So in this case, if I put it simply, Benjamin just mean that the aura should not be attached to the physical object, even if it's like, you know, famous paintings of Michelangelo or whichever else.
Well,
and in this case,
a work of art in ritual, a work of art in ritual is a fetish, and fetish is something we make, and then we forget it's a creation of us, and we attribute to it powers and reality that is doesn't belong to us anymore. To take back this ability to create our reality is what Benjamin looks searches in the reproduction of art, in making it evident that this is something human-made. When making of a piece of art a sacred object, separated object, we transform it in a fetish, and we expect this human-made God to return our gaze in a way magically. But this is a projection of our self ability to return the gaze to each other. At least, yeah.
Thank you. Amazing. At least I understand it's clearly now. So maybe I will ask Andres to elaborate his writing in the chat. Andres? Andres?
Yes, Nika, I have a very bad connection. Sadly, I'm in a place where I hope it will keep on. But I was suggesting in the chat to look at the text by Giorgio Agamben in praise of profanation, which is a sort of further elaboration on this text, I think, and in general on some of the ideas of Benjamin. So. Yeah, I'm afraid I might lose the line, so I don't think I can really comment much, but that was just a suggestion that I was giving.
And Christian?
Just maybe a final thought. I thought, please don't get me wrong, Simona, because sometimes it sounded like, okay, this is really bad. We're getting rid of the good way to do art as it used to be. And the way I interpret Benjamin is that he says, look, there's good and bad in it. And he sees revolutionary potential in movies specifically because they shatter the aura specifically. And he says we could combine science and art in a new way and make this accessible, because the aura itself is not good on its own, because it can turn into art pour l'art, right? Art for art's sake, which is empty or devoid of meaning for society. And he goes back to this as like all these things. I think what's important for him is to see the good and the bad in everything, because he says, for example, in fascism, they took the machine, the camera in this case, and they forced cult status on it, just as the masses were, the Führer was forced onto the masses. And in a situation like this, the revolutionary potential of the film is lost, because you have to protect property rights, which is part of the goal of fascism. And what's kind of interesting on a side note, I mean, the Nazis, they were really, thinking back, a lot of people think, oh, the Nazis, they were really scientifically advanced, they had rockets, they nearly had the atom bomb and all that. But on some level, they were really technology averse. They were very much into mysticism. Like Himmler, for example, when he was the head of the SS, he had he conceived of the SS of like a mystic order. They had like castles where they had rituals and everything. And there's, something made famous, I think, a little bit by the Indiana Jones movie is that was the Ahnenerbe SS, which was like a subdivision. I don't know how big or important it was, but it was real. And they were into, mystic stuff from the past. They wanted to get the Spear of Destiny. I mean, there's like a ton of movies about this stuff. And so in a way, the idea of Lebensraum im Osten, of room in the East, was to kind of replicate the Junker ideal. The Junkers were the landowners. You have your land and you have your peasants and they are subject to you. And that was very core to the Nazis. So they weren't really pro-technology. So it was essential for them to take away the revolutionary potential of art. In this case, the movies, which was maybe the form appropriate for the time. And so maybe to kind of sum this up, I think it always, we have a tendency to kind of idealize the past and say, it was all better when we were contemplating paintings by ourselves and in communion with God or something like that, And for Benjamin, it was like, look, we have to see the potential of this new form of art, because, like I said before, the term art itself has a new meaning because there's movies now. It's not what you used it to think about it.
I thank you. So maybe now is like if Simone, not Simona, Simone can say something, because it's very difficult to read in the chat, but you wrote something there. I think Simone left. So Simona, then yeah. Simona? Simona, do you want to unmute yourself? Oh, sorry. Sorry, unmute yourself.
So, yeah, just a clarification. I actually, in this text, the aura is, there is no mistake. It's bad. It's what is a very good thing to shatter. And what fascists are trying to do is to bring back the aura and as the sacrality of art, to bring back with it hierarchy and sacred and a pretension of authenticity. I was making a connection with what David says about magic, that is not just a make-believe, as in play. It's a make-believe that you have power. Magic is about power. What the fragment I was referring to is about is a late reflection on where Benjamin asked himself about the material origins of aura. There is no nostalgia for the aura of the works of art, but this material origin of aura in the gaze, mutual gaze of human beings is something fascinating for me. And it tells me a lot about what I said before, but definitely I'm not, I have no nostalgia for aura, and I am persuaded that fascism is exactly about an artificial bringing back of aura as sacred and higher and separated in art.
Max Puchalski is writing some questions in chat. So, Max?
Yeah, I had a couple thoughts. One is a version of what I said in the chat, which is, we're kind of walking the fence on if we're lamenting or celebrating the withering of the aura. And it seemed to me, I'd love to hear you talk about it, Nika, because it seemed to me in another art world, you were kind of calling for a salvaging of the sacred in art and asking, that question, are there forms of the sacred appropriate to the communal notion of social welfare? So I'm curious about that. And then my other line of question is about, our current time of digital or infinite, at least theoretical theoretically infinite reproduction. And I know Benjamin wrote about how with film, the audience sort of takes the position of the critic, where everyone's a critic. But now with internet art, the audience takes the position of producer. You think about something like meme culture. And I think in this light, we can also see things like NFTs as a way to kind of reimpose an artificial scarcity on something that, again, is at least theoretically infinitely reproducible. Obviously, the rare earth minerals used in computer hardware are not are finite. But those are my sort of two questions or provocations.
So since we're already 15 minutes after an hour, and there is 3 more people on the line, so I think I would not start a discussion now about another art world, but maybe I can make invite everyone to another reading group about another art world. Because so in short, this is very much in line with my understanding. Our article is very much in line with my understanding of what Walter Benjamin is writing. So it's and that's why I also wanted to talk about Joseph Beuys and Timothy Leary text about Joseph Beuys that we didn't have time to talk, because it's about common creation of social sculpture, as Joseph Beuys put it. Where democracy is absolutely necessary, because if some people is not allowed to take a part in the creation of the social sculpture, then it will be a bad social sculpture. So it will be like a bad politics and a bad art. So it's in this case is either everybody artist or there is no art at all, and there is no communism. So that's in short, but like I would invite everybody, maybe not now because it will be so many things connected to the pirate panel discussion started from April and so on. So maybe in the summer, and one day in summer, it would be good to set the reading group, and I will send everyone an invitation, and maybe we can collect the questions before. That will be really helpful too. And then Vasily wants to say something. Vasily?
Yeah, I don't know. I've got many ideas to share, but maybe getting back to the last comment about the aura. I think one of the reasons why nobody really understands if it is what is actually arguing, and basically everybody can be happy about what Benjamin is saying. Some people are saying, "Oh yeah, it's like Dada. They are demystifying the art world." Some other people might also say that, take the complete opposite stance and say, "Oh no, actually, what he's saying is that we should endo artwork and places where artwork is exhibited as a sacred place, and so on and so forth." And I think the reason why it is so there are so many different interpretations is that his argument is really ambiguous. It's actually, I mean, I'm not a philosopher, but it seems to me that it's quite dubious, quite questionable, especially when he says that, you know, when he makes this deduction between the ritual value of the image and the value of the unicity of the artwork, and there is like kind of like a causal relationship between these two. Basically, say, okay, there is no more ritual, so there is no more unicity of the artwork, of the artworks. It doesn't make any sense. I don't see why there should be like a causal relationship here. And in fact, quite the opposite. If you put an artwork and the destination is taking carrying out like a church service or something, then I can't really see why there can be any specificity of art, or there can be this nature of unicity. I just find it so weird. And I think, so basically what I'm saying is that because it is ambiguous, it's open to so many interpretations, and people can say it's trying to demystify the whole thing, and it's trying to do the opposite. Yeah, that's it. And by the way, I think this text as well, nobody has mentioned that. I was surprised, because this is it's a very common critique when we talk about this text. It's a very basic argument of the modernity argument, where they say, oh, you have to adapt to the techniques of your time, and the art practices are basically influenced by that. I mean, it's quite basic, and I think this is, I think for me, this is the main problem with that text.
I don't know what to do. I so much want to reply to Vasily and, you know, just tell him how wrong is he and how is he just don't understand. But I'm afraid to take over the floor, because there is some other people who like Max. Do you want to say something, because you didn't speak? Max Lawson. Okay, then. Koshika? Sorry, maybe I pronounced it incorrectly. Correct me, please.
No, you're fine. No, I actually thought, I mean, I don't know what I went in thinking, but I thought that this might be because I'm not a philosopher or an artist or anything like that. So I went in thinking maybe this is a critique of the fact that there is mechanical reproduction, but it was quite the opposite. What I kind of like found interesting is, of course, that it's the accessibility question, right? So everybody has accessibility immediately. That's great. But on the other hand, when I think of it in our times, right, do we still crave for something authentic? And whether we are still getting that from the reproduction, maybe it's not the reproduction anymore, but the fact that something is reproduced repeatedly and is everywhere, you know, do we then tend to gravitate more towards attributing value and creating an aura around the original? I don't know. I mean, and I don't know whether now, looking at how art is created, is the authenticity, is the burden of authenticity, is it on the artist? So you're actually creating a kind of relationship with an audience, which is accessible. You're still creating mechanical reproductions, accessibility to your artist there, but I'm just wondering if things have shifted in a way in our current world, which is not really addressed, or certainly couldn't have been addressed in this essay. And yeah, I'm just like hung up still on that concept of aura and whether mechanical reproduction actually destroys it or not.
I think he's saying that actually, and Simona clarified it in her introduction, that mechanical reproduction per se don't destroy aura, but it could destroy aura. For example, actually, it's interesting, like if you look at the Soviet and fascist movies, or even Soviet art in social realism and fascist art, which was, you know, famous pavilions in this World Fair of the Nazi one against Soviet, and how they approach it. It was very different at the end of the day. So Soviet, despite the fact that the socially realist artist was like part of the elite, they were paid very well and paid very well, but still, you know, they didn't. There is nothing in the social realist art that they claim to be like some kind of amazing gods figures. They would depict. They basically was an advertisement agency controlled by the Stalin. That's it. And supposed to make sure that everybody think that life is good. But the fascist, as I agree with Christian, was like kind of pumping this aura. They would need this, you know, ritualistic floor around them, and then all this nationalism and killing and human sacrifice, such that was part of the whole agenda. And that's why Walter Benjamin is also right, and that this all end up in a war. And this is absolutely, so it's unavoidably going to the war and the killing. And that's why I think Vasily is, that's what be my answer to you. No, it's not so innocent, the rituals in the churches, because as he's writing, it's very possible to use it for the power games, you know, and again, unavoidably, most of the time they will be used for the power games. So again, for me, this text is a manifesto of how we should get rid of the figure of artist and aura. Like, how dangerous is that?
Can I just reply to that? Because this is not exactly what I'm saying. Benjamin is saying that the value of the ritual, because it's not valued anymore, because there is no more ritual, then the value of the unicity or the aura is going to disappear as well. And for me, it doesn't make any sense. I don't think there is a correlation.
What is this quote? I can't, can I find it? Can you read a little bit more? So I don't understand.
I think it's number 4, somewhere number 4. Yeah, it's the first paragraph, number 4. And also, because you touched on something that we didn't really talk about, which is this, because I also read on the chat that the text was optimistic, which, if it ends up in a war, I don't think you can call it an optimistic text. And this is something that John was mentioning. It was like he was talking about the fantastic success of this text. And one of the reasons for this might also be that there is a bloody good measure of Heideggerian thought in that, at a time where you don't know how to use Heidegger now. It's just like, and that might be a good way to get back this idea of the danger of the technique and so on and so forth, and or to to save it a little bit, and you save it through Benjamin, because you've got a bit of Marx, you've got a bit of Heidegger, and so that works. And that might explain the success of this text.
Can you actually type into the chat this quote that you use, because I can't so quickly catch it. But yeah, then I can answer, or I can answer in the chat. But Max, do you want to say something?
Yeah, no, it's brilliant text. It's faulted all over the place. I think this one thing that got me straight from the beginning is art is magic. And I don't know, it's just this kind of, what is it called? The noble savage. You know, how we've come so far to this complex world, and we've kind of, I don't know, the drawing on a cave has just spiritual meaning. It pisses me off, because I don't think whoever drew the cave walls was showing off as well. He must have been like, hey, look at my cool drawing of a stag on the thing. And I feel like I don't know, showing off our complexity. And yeah, it kind of got me. And it also made me think of, John Dewey, the pragmatist, I think people call him. Yeah, it's a good book. What is it? Art and Experience, and how art and science are far more joined together than maybe we've, I don't know, we kind of separated them a lot more. And I think the investigative way of art is very akin to science. So this exploring the world through creative means is, I think, not really explored in Walter Benjamin's work. But I don't know, yeah. There's lots to think about in it. But yeah, the fascist stuff's not very nice to ponder. But yeah.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you, Vasily. I found this quote. Maybe I will post my reply in the mailing list, because we are like literally half an hour after our time and people started to leave already. So if anybody else wanted to say something, maybe John, who didn't have any reply, but have a lot of comments to his initial intervention.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's very interesting to look at him, but he was writing for a very particular time. And I think that we have gone beyond the notion of art and art artists and art in the way that he was dealing with. And we are now in a world of very, very many media, very, very many different ways of making objects and people relating to them. And so it is a much more complex environment. And I think Benjamin can teach us some lessons, but I think we should be sort of able to criticize and find the holes in his text, because it's not written for our time.
But I think there's some things that are still so, I don't know, current. I don't know, something about the distraction. I like that bit as well. Like this kind of distracted.
Okay, so I think we are half an hour late, and thank you everybody for coming. That was very interesting for me. Maybe I will post my questions and answers that I wasn't able to say now in the mailing list, and I will arrange the reading group about another art world somewhere in the summertime and send everybody invitation. Okay, thank you.